So, the year is 2020, and it just happens to be the year of our Lord, and due to the fact that we can't name the thing that led us to all of those problems on YouTube, we're just going to call it the beer. Because of the beer, it led to pretty much every country across the world going into lockdown to try and prevent the spread of the beer. This meant as a result, every sporting event, including motorsport, was put on hold until A, the spread was reduced, or B, which ended up being the direction they went in, they found a way to make every sporting event continue in some capacity. That capacity being, well, no capacity at all in the seating areas, and strict testing on personnel, camera crew, production crew, athletes, drivers, riders, players, every term that you could think of. All these sporting moments during the beer pandemic had its moments. Some were good, some were bad, some were boring, others were exciting. But if there's one that stands out from the pack that was mad, that distinction goes to MotoGP. This is the story of the maddest MotoGP season of all time. Valencia 2019 was the final race of the 2019 MotoGP season, and a race that was won by the same man who would dominate that year's championship. That man being the magnificent Marc Marquez. And in case anyone is wondering where I got that nickname from, blame TNT Sports. Anyways, back on topic. Marc was an absolute beast before the turn of the decade. With his unique riding style and riding the Repsol Honda, he was completely unstoppable. Since making his Premier Class debut in 2013, replacing the retired Casey Stoner, he won the championship in every season he competed in bar one, which was in 2015, which featured the infamous kick from Valentino Rossi that arguably cost him his 10th world title. Marc was arguably the best rider in the world at this point, so much so that in all but one race in 2019, that one being Kota where he crashed out, he finished every race in the top 2, taking 12 wins in the process and wrapping up the title at the 5th to last race at Buriram. So it's no surprise that going into 2020, and after signing a new contract extension with Honda until the end of 2024, he was once again the favourite to win the title. The first race of the 2020 season was scheduled to take place at Losail on the 6th to 8th of March. However, whilst there was racing at the circuit courtesy of Moto2 and Moto3, MotoGP were not, even though their bikes were there, as thanks to the beer, the riders and personnel for each of those teams were prevented from travelling to Qatar, whereas because the Moto2 and Moto3 riders were already there, they were able to do their races as normal. With the season being suspended after the Moto2 and Moto3 races at Qatar, we would have to wait until July before MotoGP could start their season. With a new 13-race calendar confirmed for the 2020 season, which would later become 14 thanks to the inclusion of the reserve race Portimao, the 2020 season finally got going with the Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez on the 17th to 19th of July. Throughout the 3 practice sessions, it seemed like it was business as normal, as Marc Marquez topped 2 of the 4 practice sessions. However, coming into qualifying, it would be the Petronas Yamaha Fabio Quartararo entering his second season in the Premier Class who would take his second career pole, with Maverick Vinales in second and reigning champion Marc Marquez in third. Cal Crutchlow on the LCR Honda was scheduled to start the race in 6th, but ended up withdrawing from the race after injuring his back during Sunday morning warm-up. He would be joined by the Suzuki of Alex Rins, who injured his shoulder during qualifying. With 20 riders taking the start of the race, it was time for the 2020 season to finally get going. At the start, Fabio dropped to 3rd behind Vinales, who took the lead, and Marquez moved up to 2nd. He would then lose another place at turn 6 to the Pramac Ducati of Jack Miller. 2 laps later, and Marquez attacks Vinales for the lead into turn 5, going wide in the process, but would end up taking the lead from Maverick at the next corner. However, 2 laps later, disaster. Marquez would go off at turn 4 as a result of losing the front, handing the lead back to Vinales and dropping down to the back of the pack. Little did we know at the time that this would be an omen for what was to come later on. Back at the front meanwhile, Fabio, clearly seeing an opportunity to take his first ever win, wasn't going to let this opportunity slip and immediately re-overtook Miller at Lorenzo Corner and then did the same to Vinales 2 laps later as a result of Maverick losing the rear end and going deep. Elsewhere, Marquez was climbing back through the field and got back into the top 10 with 16 laps to go as a result of passing Petrucci's Ducati. With 6 and a bit laps to go, Marquez was back up to 4th and could sense a podium was still on the cards with Miller and Vinales in front of him. On the next lap, lap, Marquez dived down the inside of Miller to grab the podium place. Miller immediately responded and reclaimed the place before Marquez went back underneath into turn 2 to fully claim third place. On the next lap, Marquez was on the back of Vinales and could sense second was on the cards. It had been an amazing comeback, and although the win was off the table, him grabbing second would stamp his authority that he was going to be difficult to beat this year. However, as soon as the cameras cut away from a shot of Valentino Rossi after he retired a few laps earlier, the next shot that we would see would change the course of the 2020 season.
Oh, he's gone! He's gone, just like I said it!
We said it!
It looked loose, and it was loose!
With 4 laps to go, Marc Marquez would suffer from a high side at turn 3, flying off his bike in the process. The bike itself would slide into the path of Marquez's left arm, and Marc would bounce on top of the gravel trap as a result. Marc ended up suffering from a broken humerus, a bone that connects the shoulder and the elbow together, and he would need surgery to repair it. He would return a few days after his surgery the following weekend for the second Jerez race, and would take part in Saturday's FP4 session, but would withdraw from the race due to the amount of pain that he was suffering whilst riding. Marc would end up withdrawing for the rest of the season, even missing the first 2 rounds of 2021 to focus on recovering his left arm. Quartararo would go on to win the Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez, taking his first ever win in the process, and then subsequently would win the second Jerez race, titled the Andalusian Grand Prix. But with Marc out for the rest of the season, it meant that the championship was wide open, and given how close the pecking order was behind Marquez, anyone could win it. The fraternity moved to Brno for round 3 of the season, which would end up being the last MotoGP race at this circuit. With Marquez out of the picture, many people believed that the championship would be between Fabio Quartararo on the Petronas Yamaha and Andrea Dovizioso on the factory Ducati bike. However, people would be shocked to realise that neither of them would be on pole, not even the factory Yamahas, Suzuki's, or even Dovi's Ducati teammate Danilo Petrucci. Instead, it would be the Avintia Ducati of Joan Zarco, who would shock everyone by getting his first ever pole since Le Mans 2018 on a bike that was a year old compared to the Pramac and the factory Ducati team. If qualifying ended up being a shock, then the race would be even more shocking, as after coming from 7th on the grid, Brad Binder on the Red Bull KTM bike came through to take his and KTM's first ever victory, becoming the first South African rider to win a Premier Class race. Franco Morbidelli would take his first ever podium in second after leading for most of the race, whilst pole setter Joan Zarco took his first podium since 2018 in third, despite having to serve a long lap penalty due to colliding with the other Red Bull KTM of Pol Espargaro, causing Pole to crash out of the race. The next 2 races would take place in Austria at the Red Bull Ring, and both weekends would end up having some big headlines. Andrea Dovizioso would go on to win race 1 at Austria, however the weekend was mainly remembered for the huge accident at the top of the Remus curve between Joan Zarco and Franco Morbidelli, which nearly led to both the factory Yamahas of Maverick Vinales and Valentino Rossi being taken out by the pair of them. Rossi himself was seen visibly shaken during the red flag period, as his and Maverick's lives could have been taken at that very moment. Thankfully, everyone involved was okay, and for the second Austrian race, the barrier at the inside of Remus was temporarily extended in case a similar accident happened again at that corner, which eventually led to a chicane being built from 2022 for motorcycle racing. The second Austrian race, dubbed the Styrian Grand Prix like in Formula 1, also had a red flag, this time around involving Maverick Vinales' brakes failing, which led to him having to jump off of his bike to avoid the huge impact the bike would have when it hit the wall at turn 1. The bike ended up bursting into flames as a result, and Maverick's race was over, meaning he couldn't take the restart. The restart ended up being 12 laps long, with the Suzuki of Joan Mir starting from P1, and what we got next would turn out to be an instant classic. Heading down to turn 4 after the restart, the Pramac Ducati of Jack Miller was able to slip down the inside of Joan Mir to grab the lead. 4 laps later, and the Red Bull KTM of Pol Espargaro overtook Mir heading up to Remus. Then on the next lap, Pol went for a move on Miller at turn 1, but ended up going deep. Mir tried to repass Pol as a result, but ended up getting backed into the Tech-free KTM of Miguel Oliveira, with the Portuguese rider passing Mir at Remus. A lap later, and Pol again went for a move on Miller, this time at the penultimate corner, and this time around, he was able to retake the lead that he lost from the first start. Going on to the final lap, the top 3 were close together. Miller got an amazing drive out of the Remus curve to go down the inside of Pol heading down to turn 4 to reclaim the lead. Pol was not done, however, and went back on the attack, going down the inside of Miller again into the penultimate corner. Pol initially passed him, but Miller did the switchback to go back underneath him into the final corner. But then, out of nowhere, well, I'll let the main commentary feed do the talking.
Here comes Jack, he's up the inside! Oh my goodness! He's all there! It's all on the line! Jack goes up the inside! The chipping
restarted Styrian Grand Prix.
That alone gives you goosebumps. Oliveira took advantage of both Miller and Pole running each other wide to pass the pair of them and take his and Tech 3's first ever Premier Class win. For the third time in 2020, a new winner was crowned and a third new team had also won a race. The season was already turning into an instant classic. Everyone's predictions after Marquez was out was being thrown out of the window, as it was hard to predict who would walk away with the title, given the pecking order seemed to change every race, even when there was a double header. After 5 rounds, Fabio Quartararo led the standings by 3 points ahead of Dovi, with the top 5 in the standings only separated by 22 points, which is just under a win. With 9 races still to go, the season was set to be even more manic. The next 2 races would take place at Misano, with the first race crowning yet another new winner, this time courtesy of Franco Morbidelli, who would take Petronas Yamaha's 3rd victory of the season, whilst Maverick Vinales in the second race took his and the factory Yamaha team's first win of the season after a tricky first few races. However, despite getting pole for that race, he would only inherit the win via luck due to the pramac of future world champion Pecco Bagnaia bottling his chance of a dominant victory after crashing out at turn 6. Barcelona was next after the double header, and Fabio Quartararo, after being in the wilderness during the last few races, was finally back to his best, taking his 3rd victory of the season, retaking the lead in the championship by 8 points ahead of Joan Mir, who despite not taking a victory, was now up towards the sharp end of the championship after a consistent run of results. Round 9 would take place at Le Mans for the French Grand Prix, and it was in this race where the relationship between the factory Ducati team and its riders fell apart even more. Back at the Austrian Grand Prix, Andrea Dovizioso had grew tired of how Ducati was treating him, and given there were barely any rides about, announced that he would be taking a sabbatical at the end of the season, which led to Ducati promoting the 2 Pramac riders of Jack Miller and Pecco Bagnaia after Danilo Petrucci had also grew tired of Ducati, leading him to sign with Tech 3 KTM. His anger towards Ducati seemed to have grew over into Le Mans, as despite his teammate Dovi still being a title contender at this point, Danilo refused to play ball, and instead in the rain-affected race went on to take his second and final Premier Class win, with Alex Marquez, younger brother of Marc, taking his first ever Premier Class podium in second after what had been a tricky season for Repsol Honda as a result of Marc being out for the entirety of the season, which put the team on the back foot given the bike was catered towards Marc's riding style, which made it difficult for Marc's replacement Stefan Bradl and even Marc's brother Alex to adapt and get the best out of the bike. Next up was a double header at my favourite Spanish track, Aragon, and both would create some memorable moments. The first Aragon race would see a head-to-head duel between the 2 Alexes, Alex Rins and Alex Marquez, both of whom had come back from 10th and 11th on the grid respectively, and were both fighting to become the 8th different winner of the season. In the case of Alex Marquez, he was looking to become the 5th new winner in 2020, and it seemed that for once, the track suited his bike and his riding style. At one point, it looked like the younger Marquez would actually pull it off. However, a mistake whilst trying to pass Rins at the final corner prevented him from doing so, meaning Alex Rins, after a frustrating season, finally came through to take his first win of the season. His teammate Joan Mir finished 3rd, and with pole sitter Fabio Quartararo having a dreadful race and dropping out of the points, it meant that Mir took the lead in the standings for the first ever time in his career. In the second Aragon race, a new pole sitter was crowned in the form of the LCR Honda rider of Taka Nakagami, who became the first Japanese rider to take pole in the Premier Class since Makoto Tamada at the 2004 Valencian Grand Prix. However, his joy at the front wouldn't last long, as in a heartbreaking moment, Taka would fall off his bike at turn 4 on the first lap of the race, immediately ending any chance he had of taking his first ever win. Franco Morbidelli took advantage of this, and despite having Alex Rins chasing him down, he went on to take his second win of the season, moving himself up to 4th in the championship and putting himself in contention for the title. Staying in Spain, and the next 2 races would take place at Valencia, which thanks to the late inclusion of Portimao would mean that the circuit would not host a finale for the first time since 2001. However, going into the weekend, there was controversy that would have an impact on 2 championships. It was revealed that due to an illegal technical modification on both Yamaha teams, Yamaha had been deducted 50 points in the Manufacturers' Championship, whilst Petronas Yamaha were deducted 37 points in the Teams' Championship, and the Yamaha factory team were deducted deducted 20 points. This meant as a result, Yamaha went from having a comfortable lead in the manufacturers to being behind Ducati and Suzuki in third, whilst the Petronas Yamaha team, instead of being 7 points behind Suzuki X-Star, were now a massive 44 points behind. It meant as a result, if Suzuki had a good first Valencia race, they would have an opportunity to wrap up the team's title at the second Valencia race. And guess what? That's exactly what they did. Whilst Fabio Quartararo had an incident on the first lap with the Aprilia of Aleix Espargaro, the Suzukis, after disposing of Aleix's younger brother Pole, went on to take a 1-2 finish, with Joan Mir finally getting his first ever win, becoming the 5th new winner of the 2020 season after passing his teammate Rins with 11 laps to go. It meant as a result, Mir now led the championship by 37 points ahead of Quartararo and Rins, which was over a win. And given there were only 2 races left, it meant Mir had a golden opportunity to win the title at the second Valencia race, with his team Suzuki X-Star having a golden opportunity to wrap up the team's title as well, as they were 82 points clear of Petronas Yamaha. Going into the penultimate race of the season, Mir just had to finish third should either Quartararo or Rins win the race to win his first Premier Class title. Mir started the race from 7th, and with his main rivals behind him on the grid, all he needed to do was stay calm and stay out of trouble. At the start, Mir didn't get off the line well and lost places to Rins and for a brief time Quartararo. Notice how I mentioned brief time with Quartararo, as whilst attempting to pass Mir, he went deep at turn 2 and ran wide, dropping him to the back. Fabio's championship chances were now essentially over, and he needed a miracle to still have a chance going into the finale. Rins was up to 8th, whilst Mir was still 11th. However, with pole sitter Morbidelli still in the lead, it meant if it was to stay like this, the championship would go down to the wire on a countback. If Mir wanted to win the title in this race, he would need to pass a few riders. And straight away, he did that, as he passed Vinales before the end of lap 1 to put himself once again in a championship winning position. He would gain another place 5 laps later when Johann Zarco fell off his bike at turn 1. Elsewhere, Fabio Quartararo, still not giving up, was carving his way back through the field and was up into the points by the time his fellow compatriot Zarco fell off. However, 3 laps later, any chance Fabio had of winning his first world title would officially come to an end. Whilst in the middle of a Repsol Honda sandwich, Fabio fell off his bike at turn 6, retiring from the race as a result and officially ending any chance he had of winning his first world title in his final year before being promoted to the factory Yamaha team. With his main threat now gone, and with Rins in 5th and Vinales 3 places behind him after Mir passed Aleix at the final corner, Mir could now just cruise to the finish and the championship would be his. And to make it even more comfortable, he would gain another place thanks to Taka Nakagami crashing out at the final corner whilst battling with Pol Espargaro for 3rd place. Whilst all that was happening, there was an intense fight for the lead going on between Franco Morbidelli and the Pramac of Jack Miller. Going into the final lap, Miller was in striking distance of Morbidelli and could sense a second career victory was on the cards. Miller went down the inside of Morbidelli into turn 1 but ran deep, allowing Morbidelli to keep the lead into turn 2. Going into turn 4, Miller once again went for a move on Morbidelli and it initially looked like he had done it. However, Franco, being wise to this, performed the switchback and once again repassed Miller into turn 5. Miller tried to move on Morbidelli into turn 7, but Franco shut the door, preventing Miller from staying on the inside into turn 8. Miller tried everything he could to get by Morbidelli, but in the end, it was not enough. Morbidelli came out of the final corner to take his 3rd win of the season, moving him up to 2nd in the championship. However, despite this, it was not enough to keep his title hopes alive, as despite immense pressure from Andrea Dovizioso on the last lap, Joan Mir came out of the final corner to cross the line in 7th place and with it become the 2020 MotoGP World Champion. Despite only getting his first ever win the previous week, his consistency throughout the season was enough to give Mir the ultimate prize, a race before the end. It was an amazing moment, and a moment that many people didn't believe would happen come the start of the season, not even after Marquez got injured. Mir became the first Suzuki World Champion since Kenny Roberts Jr. exactly 2 decades prior, and thanks to Fabio crashing out earlier in the race, it meant that Suzuki X-Star had also won the team's title. It was a double celebration for a team that only just returned to the championship full-time 5 years prior. Despite winning the double, Suzuki were not able to make it a clean sweep of titles, as the manufacturer's title was won by Ducati at Portimao, thanks to Jack Miller finishing 2nd on the Pramac, which ended up being the start of a streak of titles that Ducati would win over the next few years, whilst home favourite Miguel Oliveira took his and Tech3's 2nd ever victory after a dominant display at his home race. It would end up being Oliveira's last race for Tech3, as he would move to Red Bull KTM for 2021. In a year where everyone was stuck in their homes for most of the year and would possibly go down as the worst year in everyone's lifetimes, the 2020 MotoGP season was a season that everyone needed during a difficult time. The season literally had everything you could ask for. A close season where every weekend the pecking order seemed to change to the point you didn't know who would be quickest come that weekend, exciting action throughout the field, a raft of new winners, a raft of talent that was able to shine, a long list of moments that will be remembered forever, a lot of drama and controversy, and an unexpected rider and team winning the championship come the end of the season. Now, admittedly, this season would have probably never been this chaotic if it weren't for Marquez's unfortunate injury from the first race of the season, which had he never had, he would have more than likely have once again dominated the championship. His pace at that race before the accident proving it. And to this day, whilst he has now thankfully recovered from his injury after numerous amounts of surgery, he is still reeling from that crash ever since, as at the time of recording, he has not had a win since 2021 and he has not won a title since 2019, with the likes of Fabio Quartararo and Pecco Bagnaia winning the title in seasons gone by. However, whilst one does have to admit that, it can't take away from just how amazing that season was. It is personally my favourite ever season of MotoGP, given it was a season that we desperately needed to take our minds away from what was going on at the time in the real world. If you have never seen this season of MotoGP, I recommend that you watch some highlights of it on YouTube, or if you want to, buy the season review of it. The 2020 MotoGP season, a season that will arguably go down as one of the greatest and maddest seasons of all time.